Hello, Line Cook Nation. This is Ray DeLucci with the Line Cook Thoughts podcast. I hope everyone is doing well and I hope everyone's staying safe. Before we begin, just a reminder to go to linecookthoughts.com to check out the official Line Cook Nation merchandise and blog. And also, just be sure to hit the like button and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. My guest today is Cory Mintz. Cory is someone who I've had on the show before, and I'm going to leave a link in the show notes. Basically, with our first episode, it was episode 72. It was all about him, kind of describing who he is, what he's done in his career so far. A food reporter based out of Canada, has done so much work within not only Canada but the U.S. and it really just looks at working conditions in terms of restaurants. He's worked in restaurants. He reports on restaurant people, and he's out with a new book this month, and it's called The Next Supper: The End of Restaurants as We Knew Them and What Comes After. I read the book, and it really is, like, I'm not just saying this, it really is a great read. If you've ever worked in kitchens or you're working in kitchens currently, it's really something that I think everyone that works in kitchens or has worked in kitchens should read, because he highlights so many different things between staging, delivery apps, the importance of immigrants in our food system, and so much more. And he talks a lot about issues. And in this conversation, we talk a lot about the unrealistic financial expectations for people when they stage, cooks leaving restaurants and how they're treated if they do end up going to find another job, even if moving from fine dining into another part of the industry. We talk so much just in general about some of the issues we see in terms of the labor shortage, and I just really enjoyed this conversation with Cory. So I really hope you all enjoy it. I do want to say thank you to Cory for coming on the show. I had so much fun talking to him. Go check out the book, The Next Supper. Really, really, just think that you should check it out, because it's so, like I said, if you've worked in kitchens, it will resonate a ton with you. So thank you, Cory, for coming on the show. Use the link in the description to buy the book, and here we go. All right, Cory, welcome back to the show. Just like before I started recording, we were saying that if we run out of time, we'll pick back up. And I remember our last interview, our last conversation on the podcast, we did run out of time. So I do, encourage everyone to go listen to that first episode to learn more about Cory. But if you want to give yourself a brief introduction before we begin our conversation, that'd be great.
Elevator pitch. I went to cooking school. I never finished. I was a cook for many years, both in catering, the quick service, high end. Got out, became a restaurant critic, then food columnist, and eventually food reporter with a focus on labor and many of the other systemic issues within the food sphere. In the past 2 years, I've spent writing a book about all those issues, which I didn't expect when I began to write it. A pandemic would shake up all the jigsaw pieces of the restaurant industry and kind of reshape everything. But if anything, it gives focus to the conversations that the book is about.
Awesome. Well, excited to have you on. I do have the book here. The Next Supper is what it's called.
Hey, that's my book.
That's the book, The End of Restaurants as We Knew Them and What Comes After. There's a lot of interesting points in the book. Obviously, honestly, like I really enjoyed reading it. I dove deep into a lot of things. So I have a good amount of notes. But the one thing that I really enjoyed, or the one thing I really found that I want to talk to you about first, the topic of this idea, you're having a conversation with a chef, and he was kind of asking you how he could do better by his cooks, or how he could do better maybe by having an impact on the industry. And you had mentioned to him not bad mouthing cooks who leave, but congratulate them on like making it out and to going on to bigger and better things. And this really resonated with me, because I remember when I was working on the line for a chef back in Buffalo, New York, where I'm from, my mentor Ross Warhol, when I wanted to get into food management, I had this big fear that he was going to like out me or just like totally cut me down for wanting to leave like fine dining to go manage in a restaurant that wasn't exactly fine dining. It was more like, burgers and like everything made in house, but it wasn't like the elevated like plating with tweezers, multi-course meals. And he actually like congratulated me, and he like Fallout was super supportive and super like just honest with how happy he was that I was going after what I wanted. But I know this isn't the case for everyone. So why give that advice to that chef in regards to not bad mouthing cooks who leave when they do want to go into a different part of the industry?
I'm glad that resonated with you. It's always hard to figure out how to frame things, and I mean that's a chef who that's a household name in Canada. The chef, and I didn't use his name because he had contacted me respectfully, and it was not on the record our conversation. But I want to press that this is an influential person whose choices in how he does business has a ripple effect
Hmm.
on the industry. And when he contacted me, I was telling him something I thought was quite reasonable, especially having having cooked in high end restaurants and having like at a certain point in time, I kind of had this what if maybe fantasy about maybe opening a deli, like maybe that was my future. And while I was cooking in a high end Italian restaurant, I remember talking to my boss about it, the actual owner, and saying, I can't remember like what questions I was asking, but I remember the retort was essentially, if you want to go sell sandwiches, like, why are we wasting our time teaching you? And I remember thinking, like, wasting your time, like you're paying me $400 a week, and and that's Canadian, so that's like 80 pesos. And I think that's a really common attitude, and that's just about transitioning from one form of dining to another. To say nothing of getting out and just doing something else, whether it's something really tangential, like cooking on a cruise ship or in a retirement home or in a food lab or all the other interesting things you could do with that, or just something completely different. It's still the attitude is like you're whispered about and it's seen as treasonous. And I just thought, like, that one thing, if you could just change your attitude about that, because people are always looking for solutions, but they're also at the same time saying, well, but if my labor costs go up, and if I have to pay, if I eliminate tipping, I have to pay taxes on the amount that is now considered wages, and it's part of revenue, and there's a higher insurance cost. Here's something: if you don't want to spend any money, just like think differently about how you could treat people, so that they will see their time with you as not exploitative, uh, because it's not only serving one thing, which is continuing to be a cook or aspiring to be a chef in a high end restaurant. And I just felt like his reaction to that really exemplified what part of the problem is, which is, I can't remember the line from the book, but he said something to me like, why would I congratulate people for quitting or
Yeah.
for being,
Well, it's like, why would I
backstabbers or whatever?
congratulate quitters? I think it was his line.
Yeah. And, that's just, that's a crazy attitude. I mean, you can see how that is, how can that do anything but poison the well? If you've
Hmm.
got young people who are like, hey, I'm feeling really good, I'm learning all this stuff, but maybe I don't want to just do this one thing.
Yeah.
And if they feel that way, then they are taught to feel bad about themselves. It's almost like, telling kids that like to be ashamed of their bodies or something, which, it's not something we do in our family, but it's a common thing. It's known
Yeah.
in many cultures.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. I had a lot of imposter syndrome. I mean, I've written about this and created content about it. Talked about it a lot, especially this last year. Like for me, when COVID hit, I left. I had to leave restaurants. My restaurant had closed in Chicago. I was managing for due to COVID, and I didn't feel comfortable moving, so I had to move back home. And now I work in food manufacturing. It's still with food, still applying all those skills I had, but in a different setting. When I
Mm-hmm.
was in restaurants, I was burnt out. Like when COVID hit, I was managing like 80 hours a week. I was working a ton. And I remember thinking like, and I remember looking up at like people above me and seeing them do the same thing and being like 50 and like having families and like not being able to see them. And like, yeah, they were making money and they were, whatever. But and I just remember thinking like, I want to see what else is out there. I want to see what else I can do, what my skills transfer into. Um, and I
Are
remember
you are you working less now? I take it
I do work less. Yeah, I do
fewer
not work
hours.
80
Yeah.
hours a week. Yeah.
And do you make more or less money?
Currently, I make less than I was making managing a whole restaurant. But my
But if you're
wages,
working fewer hours to make about the same
if you
amount of
were
money, then
if
you're
you were to do the
being
math, I'm
compensated
making more
better.
hours. Yes, I'm being compensated
Right.
better if you were to do the math on the hours against the salary. So yes, yes, that
And
is
and you have and do you have like time for the mental headspace to think about things other than serving the restaurant where you work?
definitely. I mean, I have days off, and that's a big draw. Like do it. Like I was doing all this while managing the restaurant. Like I was having the podcast, I was doing the writing, I was running the
Oh,
Instagram. So it's like, yeah. I mean, for me, yeah, it's definitely like I had to go to therapy this past year. My anxiety was at an all time high. It was like a crazy experience, and I'm 24. Like, and for me, that's like I was 23 years old, I guess, at the time, and just sitting there like, what, like I'm so totally miserable, totally stressed out, and like I don't, and I'm not an advocate for people to leave restaurants. I'm an advocate for doing what's best for you. For me at the time, it was like I couldn't do it anymore. I just with COVID, the
It's
pandemic
too
hitting.
young to be. It's too young to be burnt out.
Yeah,
Like people, like
yeah,
24 is too young. If you're burnt out at 24, the problem is not you. The problem is the work.
yeah, yeah. And I will say that like for me now, it's like what I really enjoy what I do. I have a great management team who really believes in me, and not that the management team didn't believe in me before, but as you discussed in the book, the restaurants there's just like uh, this inherent idea of overworking that's already established and over just committing yourself to the business. And for someone like
Hmm.
me, I mean, for anyone, I mean, I say someone like me who runs a podcast, I couldn't imagine having a family and managing a restaurant. Like I have so
How
much respect
how
for
could you?
people. Yeah,
How could you?
yeah.
You know, the
So,
only version I saw of it when I was cooking is when I was a student, and they sent me for my 2 month internship. And I worked at a restaurant, noon to midnight every day. And one day, like 3 weeks in, the chef's wife brought his kids in, and they like played in the kitchen for an hour. He was like, "Hey, let me show you how to debone a fish or something like that." And then his wife like carted them off, and I didn't really think about it at the time, but years later, I remember thinking about, am I going to stay in this industry or not? And I remembered, well, that's what success looks like. That's somebody at the top of the food chain who see, and he's there for almost the same 12 hours a day that I am. So when does he see his kids or his wife?
mhm. Yeah,
It wasn't something I aspired to.
yeah. And so, kind of getting back to like this idea of people of being okay with people going into different realms of food. I found that part really, like, I mean, it really hit me. I feel like for some people, I mean, I've had a lot of conversations with people looking to go into different things, or people who have gone into different things and coming back into the kitchens. But either way, I think that
Well,
part.
a huge portion of your colleagues over the last year and a half have been facing this question, right? I mean, a
Hmm.
quarter of people are not going back. So I've spoken to people, both employer and employee, who have talked about the variety of directions people are going. They're going to other jobs in other fields. They're going to serving. They're going back to school. They're moving back home and reducing their costs. But like everyone has been having these conversations, and for me, they're giving me the nutshell. But I assume when you're talking with your friends who are the
Hmm.
same age as you, these are like kind of big life and death decisions and conversations, right?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. I mean, I've talked. I mean, not just friends, but just with the Instagram having a good amount of followers, just those in general too. Like a lot of people are right now, and over the past year, have been deciding whether or not. And some people stay, and some people leave, and some people have stayed in the industry and gotten into better situations just because the job market right now is kind of a leverage for them. But then there's definitely people who have left and also found better work, and there's people who have stayed and have had like just it's just gotten worse for them. So I think right now, yeah, there is that reflection point. I think what gets me upset, I posted, I post people on the page like their thoughts, and I had someone kind of
Mm-hmm.
heckling people on the page, and so I DM'd them. I was like, hey man, like, you know, making fun of people because they're stressed out or because they're overworked isn't going to help anyone in the industry. And he was just like, well, if you're he's just basically saying like, well, we got to stop whining. People are weak. People like Bourdain would have never like stood for this and all this like this whole guardian like gate guarding bullshit. And I'm like, dude, like, don't you have anything else in
Right.
your life? Like, what is going on?
Don't you have some high school kids you should be bullying?
um,
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know anyone who has any time left for people like that in this industry or any else.
no, no, I don't either. So full circle, I guess, to say that like it's crazy to me that a chef would say that because you can see. I mean, the excuse was unemployment benefits in the U.S. and then those ran out, and we still like have a labor shortage, and like the excuse has always been like people don't want to work, but you see
Hmm.
like that's not it's not the case. Like it's just when our industry rates so poorly
Wait,
and
wait, wait. You'll have to correct me here. I turned on the TV and I saw somebody saying because of the government handing out free money, nobody wants to work anymore, and that's why these great jobs at Sonic Burger and all the other fast food. That's why you can't get people in there. And the heroes, the job creators, they're paying the cost for these lazy workers. What did I miss in this equation?
It's crazy. It's crazy when you say it out loud.
I
It's
mean,
crazier that people like believe it.
that
Uh,
is because that is the narrative they're pushing, and
yeah.
absent of someone who's from this industry, I saw and heard economists, on the radio and television, just kind of scratching their heads, incredulous, like, well, gosh darn it, we're surprised. I mean, there's a number of factors. We can't quite say why it is there's such a labor shortage right now, despite the fact that had you, as you have, as I have, been talking with people over the last year or two, there was a labor shortage before the pandemic. There was a shortage of skilled people who want to continue in the industry for a variety of factors. And then obviously this situation exacerbated everything.
Hmm.
But I mean, I was talking to people back in January and February saying, I'm not going back. And about a third of the people I know are not going back. So to have these people scratching their heads in May and June going, there's nobody to work the patios, we can't figure out why, was, to use another overused phrase these days, it was really gaslighting us. Like we understood the reasons, but I think if anything, we can take that narrative back from them.
Hmm.
And particularly if you have a platform and you have a platform and I have a platform, I'm promoting my book right now and I'm doing as many radio and TV and podcasts as I can. And I just got finished writing an opinion piece today, and I tried to make the focus of it like um, letting workers know that they have more power than they think.
Hmm.
Because even now, when it's clear that the balance of power has shifted for the first time, like in my lifetime, and you're starting to see people be able to get a better hourly rate, at the
Hmm.
very least, like Toronto, like 5 years ago, you couldn't get more than $14 an hour. You have to really argue for how anyone could be paid more than 14 an hour to work in a kitchen. And now nobody's showing up with less than the promise of 17 an hour. And that's
Hmm.
Canadian. These Canadian numbers, which mean nothing in the States. But like, if all that comes of this is people getting a few more dollars an hour, then this moment will not be living up to its potential, because there's really an opportunity for workers to advocate for each other and
Yeah.
create better conditions across the board rather than
Yep.
just focus on the monetary aspect of it.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. And I also like I empathize with restaurant owners in a sense where it's like there's all the it's like there's this whole system like yes it's on the onus of someone owning a business to be there for their employees, but we've also created a culture where it's like how many people have we taught that this is okay, that's how you manage, that's how you manage. And so it's not saying there's no blame on anyone, but like you said, like this is a moment where we can, not only for workers but for people who own businesses, for people who lead in kitchens, to have that like experience to change, to be able to recognize that change does need to happen.
Yeah, yeah. And I watched this panel discussion. I'm doing a symposium next week, and I watched one of the person who's going to be interviewing me. She was doing a talk today, Amanda Cohen, Dirt
Mm-hmm.
Candy, and she's someone I think of as a real leader in the industry in terms of what she's done with her restaurant specifically. She's one of the people who cut out tipping 6 or 7 years ago and didn't revert back to a tipping model. And then this summer, after we worked on this story for Eater about her profit margins that kind of elucidated that she was losing money on a popular sandwich, she just finally decided, like, I'm gonna raise everybody to, I think it was 23 an hour. Everybody's at 23 an hour, and my prices are going up, like, period. And she's doing a tasting only menu, I think. So there's an audience that can absorb some of that cost. But
Mm-hmm.
I derailed my own train of thought. Oh, right.
Okay.
She was saying in this talk, she said something that caught my attention, which was they were specifically talking about tipping, but the idea that, like, if you're comfortable with a system that is inherently inequitable for the various stakeholders, then like, what are you defending? I mean, we're specifically talking about tipping, but if
Mm-hmm.
you could just sort of accept that, like, well, the only way to make this sausage is to take advantage of this group of people here. There's no other way to do the math. And like, what is it you love so much about the industry?
Mm-hmm.
How is that hospitality to say, whether it's the guest need or the profitability or one group of workers versus the other, um, how how can you square that with the idea that's like lovely to provide a special dining experience for people and to feel warm, which we do, right, when that happens. But another phrase I've been introduced to having a 2-year-old, which is if it's not fun, if it's not fun for everyone, it's not fun for anyone. Uh, which is This is something that's starting to come up. She's an only child, and she's very she's loud, and
Mm-hmm.
she likes to have her way, and she doesn't have to share with anyone because she doesn't have any siblings. But she's got to learn when it comes to pushing or grabbing or taking things that aren't hers, or asking, or just not asking politely that, like, well, if somebody's not having a good time, then actually nobody's having a good time. I think that's a good rule for all of us.
Yeah, no, I think I totally agree. I want to transition to another topic in the book, the idea of the chef-driven restaurant and the inherent problems of that, and especially staging and how. So this is I, another part of the book I really related with. So when I went to culinary school, I went to Culinary Institute of America. Come from like a lower income family in Buffalo, New York. I mean, we got everything. We had everything we need, but like I had to work to pay my own car bill. I had to pay my own bills in college. Like
Mm-hmm.
I had to take out my own student loans. I'm currently paying off my student loans.
And I remember from our talk, you went to the Culinary
Mhm.
Institute of America and you got scholarships. Plus,
Yep,
you
got
worked your way
scholarships.
through, right?
Yeah, got
Yeah.
scholarships. Plus max financial aid from my situation
Mm-hmm.
of going into school. Still have debt, obviously, because it's a pretty pricey school. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, but I would always like, and I kind of tweeted about this last night after reading this. Is I would like when I got there, I had this immense pressure, and this is on me. I'm not saying like anyone put this on me. It's like to work in a Michelin star restaurant. Like I wanted to be a Michelin star chef. Now, granted, before going to culinary school, I didn't know who Thomas Keller was. I had no idea what Michelin stars were. I thought the pinnacle of fine dining was Olive Garden. So like going to culinary school, it's like, all right, there's this whole nother world. But I was like, all right, I want to go ahead and work in these Michelin restaurants, and I was all for working for free and like going into the kitchens and like doing whatever I needed to do. But the reality is, when I graduated college, I went out to stage in Chicago. I staged in New York, and I was like, wait, like I can't afford this. Like, there's no way I'm going to afford to be able to stage or work for $13, $14 an hour and live in like the Gold Coast of Chicago, or even live in the suburbs of Chicago, or to live
Did you
anywhere.
try? Did you try coming from a wealthier family?
I should have tried that.
Yeah,
I
this
actually
is a
didn't try
trick.
that option. um,
Yeah,
and
I
so
think
kind
next
of,
time consider
yeah,
that.
I will. But I remember when I was reading that, I was like, yeah, like that was it for me. Like that's kind of why I left fine dining. I couldn't, I like to pay student loans, to pay my car loan, to pay car insurance, my own rent, like my own groceries. Oh my gosh, like
Hmm.
it was like impossible. It wasn't feasible at
Yeah,
all. And so, what
and
did you
that
find in that when you were like researching that?
you have these conversations, and there's they're often cyclical,
Mm-hmm.
or at the very least, they bring up the same talking points again and again. And much like tipping, there's kind of people who are like, there are people who are for it, and there's people against it, and they have the variety of same reasons again and again. But I think that the story you just told highlights is that whenever you talk about some restaurant that gets by on all this stage labor, and I think this is less of a thing in America than it used to be, and it's still a much bigger deal in Europe,
Mm-hmm.
where the labor laws allow for that. But even in America, where it's not technically allowed, you still have so many defenders of this practice and saying, well, this is the only way to learn at the feet of the master, and they'll always have these sort of American exceptionalism stories that go along with it, to say, like, well, I did it, and the people that I knew that were there, yeah, there was a couple rich kids, but there was this one person who was, sleeping on the subway, and there was this one
Yeah.
person who worked 3 jobs, and it's all this sort of triumph of the human spirit story. And one, it shouldn't be that hard to like to go and learn. You shouldn't have to be homeless or working 3 jobs. And two, how many examples like that exclude how many examples that are like your story?
Mm-hmm.
which are all the people who say, I would like to do that. I got right up to the start line and said, I cannot financially make this work.
Yeah.
Uh, and just didn't do it, you know. So for the 13 people in that kitchen staging and going like, we're this crew of elite outlaws kind of giving of our bodies and minds and sacrificing ourselves to learn what it means to make great food. And we're, you know, nobody else has the guts to push themselves this hard, but actually there's like 100 other people who are like, yeah, I would have, but like I would be homeless, or like the government would come after me for the student loans that I'm not paying because I'm spending 14 hours a day not making money. Which,
Yeah.
but despite all that, you know, I put in the book that there's still an inherent conflict or contradiction, and I think that's fine. Two things can be true at the same time, and that I still I still end up agreeing with the people who would say the system is unfair, and yet I, having been a cook who was exploited as a worker, became who I am because of that
Mm-hmm.
situation. But a lot of people could say that. A lot of people could say, well, I learned to I learned to drive because I'm the child of an alcoholic. You know, you can develop a lot of strength through adversity. That doesn't justify the adversity. Um,
Yeah.
if I had the opportunity today, if I had the time and the money and didn't have a child who needed me, and somebody said, "Do you want to go like spend 2 months working for free in this restaurant? You're gonna meet these amazing people and have these experiences. You won't get any money." Like if money wasn't an issue and all these things, I'd say, "Yeah, like that sounds really neat."
Yeah.
But the idea of industry that needs that free labor, that's what's not right about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree with you that like, and it's not like like you said, it's not a lack of work ethic. I promise anyone listening, I would have, if I had the financial resources, I'd probably still be in that system today, you know, working my ass off trying to be whatever it is I wanted to be. Um, but you kind of like when that
Mm-hmm.
reality hits, I talk a lot on my podcast, talk a lot about the page. It's like people ask me, is culinary school worth it? You know, should you go to culinary school? And I really think like, and it's hard, right? It's hard to make this decision when you're 18 because when you get into food, most people want to cook, most people want to own their own restaurant. Um,
Mm-hmm.
know what you want to do after. Like, don't go get a bachelor's degree and then expect to work on the line. Like don't you know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people will get this bachelor's degree or they'll go get a degree like that and then they'll go back into kitchens. And I'm not saying you can't do that, but like if you're going back into a kitchen, like I went into a management role and I was able to start learning how to manage and use that degree. But it's like don't accrue that debt, don't accrue all that financial hardship if all you want to do is go back on the line. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think that's like,
Are
go ahead.
are you? Does it seem? You know, we spoke like we said just pre-pandemic, and I've been following you, you know, on social media and the podcast. And am I right in sort of seeing a slight shift in your thinking about some of this stuff?
Mm-hmm. Oh, listen, totally.
Like,
I don't. I'll be honest. I have no interest really in Michelin anymore. When the stars come out, I really like. Sure, congratulations to whoever gets them. I don't like. It's a pinnacle for people in cooking, but like I really like that stuff. Really doesn't enter my radar. Like it doesn't excite me. Um, Stuff like that doesn't. I don't really care. Like I really don't care about World's 50 Best. I stay aware of it because obviously it's like
how dare you?
I
How
know.
that's blasphemy.
I know.
I always think of the where all those lists as this is probably a dated reference. In fact, it is a dated reference, a 1986 Saturday Night Live skit. But there was an SNL skit called the All Drug Olympics, and the premise was like you had to be doing steroids. And I think and the bit is basically Phil Hartman is trying to like do this deadlift on these barbells, and he's going, and then finally there's prosthetic arms. He pulls, and his arms just pull off, and they congratulate him. They're like, so close, so close. But I always think of these lists in the same way, and that they're like, yeah, sure, you're the best amongst the people who are juicing, and you're
Hmm.
juicing. Your steroids are these young people who are willing to work like 16-hour days. Like without that, tell me, you know, show me how great your ingredients and your service and everything are without the corners of like not paying people for their actual value.
Yeah, yeah, and it's just for me, and it's not like a. And I'm sure some people hear it and be like, "Oh, he just doesn't care because he doesn't like he couldn't cut it, whatever. Like I don't like. There's people who have their ways. Like if that's what you want to do, if that's the system you want to go into, like by all means go ahead. If that's what you aspire to be, like
Sure.
more power to you. But for me, it's like that's not what I'm interested in anymore. Um, and like you're saying, like this idea of like I posted what did I post? I posted like a week and a half ago. I was basically saying like if you're a restaurant and you can't operate without free labor, then maybe you shouldn't be in business. And there was like someone commenting, kind of saying like, hey, like this is a dangerous rhetoric. Like it's not like these chefs are asking people to work for free. Like he's
That
like,
is the most, that is such a mildly critical statement. If you can't get by without free labor, you shouldn't be in business. That is not a radical position, but people are so um, warped by the mentality of fine dining and the perspective on the world and the workforce that it needs to drill in to young rookies that they will take this position like, hey, you're really playing with fire with statements like people shouldn't work for free. That's that's not radical. It just isn't.
yeah, yeah, and I mean, it's just so that being said, just this whole idea of staging, the idea of chef-driven restaurant lists, free labor, reading the examples in your book, like it totally hit with me because I think that's like a reality we don't talk about enough. That most people that want to do that cannot even start because they can't afford it. Most people who want to do that can't start because it's just not feasible. Like I said, I'm a single person in my life. I couldn't imagine wanting to do that and having like two kids and or having a family or having a family member who needed to like be taken care of while I'm doing that. So it's just like there's so much and like I just get caught up in the idea that a lot of people see that as the pinnacle of our industry, where I just see it as a sector of our industry. It's like there's Michelin, there's fast food, there's R&D, there like what I mean. It's
Well,
not like
and this is partly how and why I organized the book like I did by separating it into, as you mentioned, the chef-driven restaurant, which anyone who works in the field knows exactly what that is. They don't need it explained versus the immigrant family restaurant, the
mm,
fast food, full service, fast food, limited service, etc. Because they all work very differently and they're all part of a very not monolithic industry, but they're all like there's lots of opportunities within all of them. And it's not a coincidence that the chef driven restaurant chapter is almost double the size of everything else in the book because
yeah,
I mean that's my professional background too, and that's where I probably have the most things that I like was just dying to get out. And the more people I talk to, I'm like, oh, I can't leave out any of these interviews. And I talk to so many people who are also pursuing something different in terms of different management styles that were working against those industry orthodoxies. And we can get into there, but I just want to piggyback on something you said about cooking school. The idea that yes, go to cooking school, but have an idea for what you want to use it for.
mm-hmm.
Which is something I think about more. That's a conversation I've had a lot over the last 5 or 6 years ago, and I wrote some story about cooking school where I basically asked every like a whole bunch of chefs and restaurant owners, like, would you rather have a cooking school graduate or someone who'd spent the same 2 years at McDonald's? And it was kind of 50-50, like half of them
Yeah,
were like, the person who worked 2 years at McDonald's, like they know how to show up on time, like ready to work. If
yeah,
they kept that job for 2 years, I know more about them than I do about the cooking school graduate who may be great, who may be super talented, but the other one has proved they have a work ethic at the very least. But in terms of the value of it, and it's hugely different. Tuition at George Brown in Toronto, where I went, is now I don't know, it's like $5,000 or something like that.
yeah.
Canadian, and CIA is what?
I think when I went, it was 36,000 a year, or
Yeah.
probably
So there's
40,
no
probably closer to 40.
comparison. I mean, where I went is a community college. You get a diploma. In terms of the student debt that you build from that, it's nothing compared
Mm-hmm.
to the CAA. But either way, I'd say, yeah, I'm with you. Like, have an idea of what you want to do, but the same as if you're going to go do a BA in fine arts or history or whatever, like, don't go just to go. Nobody goes to this cooking school just to go. The difference is people go to cooking school, like you said, almost unanimously because they want to work in fine dining, right? Like There's always people there who are interested in something else. There's always two or three
Mm-hmm.
people in the class who they've come with a business plan. Their parents have, they grew up in a restaurant with their parents. So the majority are like young people who want to work in fine dining and don't really know what that looks like. So I'd side with you on the idea of like have an idea of what you want to do with the provision that that idea can change. Like you don't have to be married to your dream. You can get 3 years into your career and have a serendipitous moment where you go, wow, I found farming. It turns out I want to do that, or whatever the thing is. Sorry, that's the end of my rant.
No, I'm gonna piggyback off that real quick. The most important conversation I had in culinary school was with a mentor. His name's Dwayne Brown. I've had him on the podcast. He's just a mentor of mine. He was a part of the CIA like faculty, and it was like my second to last semester. I was in his office talking to him. He had been talking to me about like kind of post graduation what I was gonna do. And I told him, I was like, I'm going to go stage in Chicago. And when I graduated, that was my goal. I staged in Chicago, I staged in New York, and eventually was like, then it came to a full realization that this wasn't for me. But my second to last semester, my eighth semester, I was in his office. He's like, what are you going to do? I'm like, I'm going to go work Michelin. I'm going to go work in restaurants. And he's like, all right, cool. And he's like, how are you going to pay your student loans? And I was like, well, I'll just work and pay him off. He's like, no, like, let's do the math. And I was like, all right. And I remember like kind of being upset with him. I was like, well, hell, like, why are you shitting on my dream right now, man? But the reality wasn't that. He like laid it out for me. He's like, all right, so you got the student loans. He's like, what do you got with your car payment? I was like, all right, I got this. What do you got with your insurance? And it was starting to create that picture. And I think, and I promise, if I didn't have that conversation, I don't know that I'd really critically think about it. And I was very lucky
Mm-hmm.
to have someone be there for me to have that conversation.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, stuff like that kind of really like it's like my passing on, like, hey, like you said, culinary school is great, but if you're gonna put all the work in the 4 years, the money, you can't go work on online unless, like you said, you come from a wealthy background. Unless it was all paid for, sure, that's one thing. But if you're like me, you can't do it. I don't know.
No, that was a really pivotal conversation, and I'm happy that you formed what sounds like a lasting mentor relationship with this person, because it's very valuable. He might have saved you going down a path that could have ended really darkly for you.
Yeah, he definitely did, and I give him a ton of credit for it. So, two topics I want to get into. So I want to go to the immigrant conversation, but first I want to kind of hop over to delivery apps, and I'm making this connection for a reason. So when I
Mm-hmm.
had left restaurants during COVID, I couldn't find work. I actually did Instacart for a little bit. I talked about this on my podcast. It was whatever. The pay obviously wasn't great. It's a delivery app. But I started talking to, until I was able to get a job, then I kind of stopped doing that. But I talked to chefs, and I would have chefs say, I remember I talked to a chef, I'm not going to say their name, I'm not going to say where they're from. I'll say they, for example. They were like, hey, I have these cooks that they had on my team for quite some time. And I tried getting them back once things started to reopen. And their response was, hey, chef, I'm doing Uber and Lyft now, and I'm making double what I made at the restaurant. And at the end of the night, I don't have to mop any floors. Why would I come back into the kitchen? And I know you have the app about, or you have the chapter about how destructive those apps can be. Also, there's examples of people who use delivery for their advantage. I've talked to chefs. Some people, a lot of people don't like these apps. Other people have used them to their advantage. Have you talked to anyone who's kind of left cooking and like had to utilize those apps? Because for me, that was a big theme. A lot of these people having to go into the gig economy that were in the restaurant industry in order to pay bills, make money during the pandemic. I just wanted to ask you if you had seen anything like that in your time, like writing.
Yeah, I had spoken to people who had done that, and but at the same time, I think I should acknowledge what's I don't know. I think like a blind spot in my at least in my the rhetoric of that chapter, which is like, look, I'm not agnostic about this. I'm pretty anti third party delivery. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
from my perspective, that wing of the tech industry just has a predatory business model, and I don't even 2 years ago I kind of had to go on for 2 minutes to explain it, and these days, as a result of the pandemic, I feel like people are aware of this. People get the idea, right? They take a
Yeah.
larger commission. than your average restaurant makes.
And I'll
And
say,
you
like,
know,
your
and that
chapter did, like, I mean, your chapter ex- shared a lot to me that I didn't realize either in regards to just how like predatory they can be.
and it, you know, the point being, I could go on and on, and you could go on and on, but I think the thing you highlight is that I don't focus on the upside to workers
Mm-hmm.
within that chapter, and the reason I don't focus on the upside to workers is like that is that has been part of the dominant rhetoric and
Mm-hmm.
talking points from that industry. Like we provide flexibility. People, they always say like can potentially make, this much per hour. The figures are always in debate, but I'm not going to debate any particular individual who has had a positive experience. I'm happy for them. At some point, I was speaking with someone who was like managing multiple kitchens at a university level, and him and his wife, like, out of work, were also delivering or picking up for Instacart, and they were happy with it. And but at the same time, he was also telling me like, well, I'm also getting like CERB, which is the Canadian equivalent of like the stimulus for not working. And he was like, well, I'm getting it, and I'm not declaring what I'm making. And also, I don't wear a mask because I think COVID's partly a hoax. And I was like, all right, I don't know that you're going to be the poster boy for this conversation. But
Yeah, just
yeah,
to be clear,
there's a potential.
I because I left restaurants, I didn't get any stimulus during. I mean, I got the check we all got, but I was on unemployment. For 8 months, I was kind of
I
trying to
got a
figure out.
$1 million check. I pretended. Don't tell anybody about this. This is between us. I pretended I had a bunch of employees that I don't, and I got $1 million, and I turned it into cash, and I built a golden castle in my backyard. Don't tell the IRS. The point I wanted to make is that I lost my train of thought. Hopefully you're editing this. Is that there are people for whom they work. There are workers for whom it works.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with all these companies is that they capitalize on that narrative. Like, look, there is a certain percentage of our drivers or cyclists who are advocates for this. It works. They don't want to become employees. They want to be classified as what's the term, independent contractors, right? Which is part of their rhetoric behind their lobbying to prevent that law in California, AB5, which would have required them to pay employee benefits and such. And they spent $200 million to overturn that with Prop 22. And the problem is that, yes, even if you highlight people just like yourself who can say like, this worked for me, it's that these people change their business model all the time.
Mm-hmm.
They have to, because they're constantly chasing a profitability that is still elusive. And they have so much money that they can change the laws to suit their purposes. And their purposes are to finally become profitable, even when they're raking in billions of dollars, right? Like DoorDash, I think at the end of last year, doubled its revenue and still lost money. So it's the idea that like they're the house, right? And we are the gamblers. And even if some people sometimes win, that's not evidence that the whole game isn't
Yeah.
fixed.
Oh, and I totally agree. I just thought there was a weird contrast when I was in during the pandemic to see that like you have people who were once dedicated to like working Michelin and whatnot now just like doing gig economy jobs and driving and telling chefs like, hey, like this is for me this is better. It was just like a weird contrast. It's like
Well, I love the take this job and shove it moment. The problem is when the delivery companies don't need these people the way they needed them before, they change the conditions again.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. I mean, yeah, totally agree. So, want to go to this idea that you have in the book? Well, it's not an idea; it's a reality. But you break it into ideas of the two worlds of cooking when it comes to immigrant workers. There's the English cooks or the English speaking cooks, and the non-English speaking cooks in kitchens. And I was wondering if you could kind of explain that idea in terms of how you like talk about it in the book.
Sure. Well, that's another sort of that's another example of where when you write about issues in restaurants, or when you talk about it in the public sphere like you do, you sometimes get a sort of whataboutism reaction from your audience who says, yeah, but I know this restaurant where that's not true. I know this restaurant where this doesn't happen. How can you? Or I worked in a restaurant where this doesn't happen, and the reason for that is because there's different types of restaurants. So for this particular chapter, it's like, okay, let's talk about the restaurants that are generally owned by first and second generation immigrants. Their families, they tend to get handed down. They often have family members working in the kitchen. They operate as job centers for those families, for bringing people into the country. Sometimes people, sometimes they are centers of their own type of exploitation when, they bring in people who are not family members, but like they've got recruiters in other parts of the world who bring people over on types of visas that then tie them to the restaurants. There was a story in the Times a few years ago about nail salons and restaurants in Chinatown where like people were, paying off debts and paid less than minimum wage because of the way that they're brought in. But the topics that I focused on in that chapter felt like things that were specific to that type of restaurant, which for me is also like my favorite type of restaurant, because I kind of, after years as like a restaurant critic and a food writer, but someone who lived downtown, rode a bicycle, didn't get his driver's license until his mid 30s. It wasn't until I finally really got out into like how vast Toronto is that I discovered all the great food surrounding it, which you don't really have access to because public transportation there is not good. And so it started to highlight like how real estate shapes our restaurant culture, like who can afford to operate in different parts of town and who has access to them. And then the topic of gentrification, which I felt was adjacent to that because something else that I'd been obsessed with, maybe because the year that I started writing about restaurants was the year that this one restaurant opened on Ossington in Toronto. The restaurant was called Foxley. And this guy, Tom Tai, was serving like just this mind-bending to me combination of different Asian flavors in ceviches, and was just doing like just gorgeous things that I hadn't tried before. And everyone fell in love with him, but came to this part of town that like there was, at nighttime, he was the only business open, except other than like a Portuguese bakery. And then 5 years later, it's like Vegas. It's just lined with restaurants. And we've all seen that story somewhere in our town, and the other behind closed doors, the part of that story is like, so that person comes in, they're paying $1,800 a month in rent, and then once they make the place desirable, now landlords realize they can get $2,500, $2,900, and within a few years they're asking for 10 grand, and that restaurant that helped make the neighborhood is gone, right? When you come up for your 5-year, 10-year lease, you can't afford the neighborhood that you helped make cool. Another idea I heard today was like, there should be some way to subsidize that. Like I'm paraphrasing someone else's idea, but like anytime a real estate agent uses some restaurant to help promote a neighborhood as a desirable place to sell houses, the real estate agents should have to subsidize that restaurant's rent, because that's the person who inevitably will be pushed out of the cool neighborhood they helped create. But all of that felt very adjacent to the same conversations about gentrification, because we do the same thing as we sort of move through the urban sprawl, as chefs say, like, well, I'm going to make this neighborhood cool, or I'm going to try. I think I have enough cachet that people will come to eat my food in this godforsaken, in Red Hook. And then, and they transform that place and either push out other people, or people there find that their food has to change in order to attract like the new middle-class clientele. But my ultimate conclusion, sort of trying to take something away from that chapter, I tried to put a lot in about sort of like the economic power of these immigrant restaurants and like how much they add to our economy. But ultimately, it was just mostly me advocating for saying like, hey, if you really love restaurants, hey, go find these places. Like, it's not as hard as you think. And particularly as I moved from Toronto to Winnipeg, and I no longer had friends who could just tell me like, I didn't have Suresh anymore to tell me like, I'll tell you, I'm going to take you to this Sri Lankan place in Scarborough. I was like, I don't have anybody here. I got to figure this stuff out for myself.
Yeah.
So I copied his moves. I was like, Suresh, how do you do the detective work? And it's been so rewarding, particularly again, like I lived in Toronto for 45 years. So when I got here, and I was like, where do I get my spicy Chinese noodles? Where do I get my spicy Sri Lankan noodles? And those are the businesses I want to support. Like those are the ones that I want to make sure they stick around.
Yeah. And I'll even take it a step further. We talk about this whole idea of leaving kitchens and staging and wanting to work Michelin. And Caroline Hatchett, she's an editor for Plate Magazine. I was in a talk talking about like the idea of leaving restaurants, and she was even saying in that the inherent privilege some people have to actually be able to leave restaurants. Like we rely on immigrant workers in our kitchens so much more than like the general public realizes, and many of them don't have that luxury of going to find a position
Mm-hmm.
elsewhere or going to work in a better kitchen environment. And so just that idea in itself of not only just like the restaurants, but the workers themselves and that barrier between English speaking and non-English speaking and what that means for people, I think is really important. So I was really like just happy to see that you touched that upon that topic in the book. So
It's huge. I mean, it's something that I personally felt when I was in kitchens and I realized that I'd reached the end of my road, and I was like, uh, I didn't finish high school. I don't know who would hire me and what they would hire me to do. I just felt like I had no options, and it was really highlighted by one of the people I talked to in the book, who was a cook chef in Pittsburgh, and he had just finished his first year of law school, and he told me like he just had the same experience except from the other side. He had a BA. He'd finished his BA before he started cooking and fell in love with cooking and spent years doing that and rose in rank. But he could see clearly in the kitchen, it's like, hey, other people have something they can fall back on it, and the other half is like, nope, I'm trapped here. So I know that feeling a little bit, but not to the extent where like my citizenship status or my language ability like almost completely obstruct me. And there's another side to that story, which is that we talk about staging, not even staging, but the way that like cooks will move around. 6 months here, a year or two here,
mm-hmm.
and you learn all these different skills. And so many of these restaurants, for my work as a reporter, I've been inside like Korean and Sri Lankan and Chinese restaurants where like everybody's been there 10, 15 years. I was in a restaurant where they're like, this guy's been running the kitchen for 30 years. There's just there isn't the turnover, and B, there's a language barrier from the other side. Like people can't just come and say like, your food is awesome, I want to work here for a year, like unless you speak the language.
Yeah.
And as a result, they don't go and share these people's food and their stories, in a
Mm-hmm.
way that like if someone in your kitchen worked at a Noma or the French Laundry, they're gonna be like, well, here's the way we did it at the French Laundry, and let me tell you about this inspiring person that I met there. Like it just doesn't.
Yeah.
The bees don't cross pollinate, which is sad.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Great. Well, I know we're running up on time. I know we're almost done here, but I do want to say thank you. Another conversation, obviously, that has flown by. Definitely, we'll have to do part 3 of the podcast at some point. But before we head out, if you just wanted to share first off where people can get the book. Once again, The Next Supper. I have it right here. If I can pick it up without dropping it, which I almost did. The Next Supper by Cory Mintz. If you could just share where people can find this, and then also your like social
Sure.
media and all that, that'd be great.
Well, this is radio, not television. So for the listener, Ray held up a book. It's rectangular,
Exactly.
and you can go to corymintz.ca, and there's links to all your major booksellers. But anywhere they sell books, they sell this book. I just got a box of them today, actually, from my publisher. It was very exciting. It's got a very slick little cover on it. And on social media, I'm my name, Cory Mintz, Coremintz, or a Z if you're calling from the United States, where you say the letter Z funny. And I always like to, I like to engage with people online unless they are writing to tell me that I'm an idiot, in which case I don't have time for you.
Yeah, I get that a good amount. So, same here.
You starting to get that too?
I am starting to get that. Yeah, right before the podcast, I had someone come on. I actually posted that conversation on Twitter. So, it's a caption. There are a
Life
lot of
is short.
yeah. I put there are a lot of tough in quotations. There are a lot of tough chefs in the industry. So I just find it funny. But no, Cory, really great book. I suggest anyone read it. Not just saying that. So many topics hit home for me. So if you're in the industry and you kind of think like I do, I think you really enjoy it. Thanks for coming on. And yeah, just was a pleasure to talk to you.
Let me just add, it's a pleasure talking to you. I hope we get to talk again. And I'm happy that you've made these changes in your life. You seem happier. You seem less stressed. I'm happy for what you're doing now. And I'll bet the next thing is something you don't even know what it is yet. So I'm happy for whatever that thing is too.
Thank you so much.
All right. Stay in school. Don't do drugs.
Sounds good. So there you have my interview with Cory Mintz. Once again, check out his book, The Next Supper, The End of Restaurants as We Knew Them and What Comes After. You will really love the book if you've worked in restaurants or you do currently work in restaurants. And I put the link to get the book in the description of this episode. Cory, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you all for listening. Be sure to hit like and subscribe to this channel for more interviews, and I'll see you on the next podcast.